All right. Trump's about to have one of the worst weeks of his life. Breaking news this morning. Opening statements, as you know, begin today in the Donald Trump criminal trial. But the Daily Beast has learned that the very first witness for the prosecution will be the former publisher of the National Enquirer, who headed the tabloid when he and Michael Cohen and Donald Trump were running their catch and kill scheme, where the publisher of the National Enquirer would alert Donald Trump to what they called bimbo eruptions. The National Enquirer would then buy the story, catch it, and then kill it. And then Trump, through his fixer, Michael Cohen, would reimburse the Enquirer for paying the women for their story and buying their silence and then killing the story. And the name of the publisher of the National Enquirer who helped kill all those stories about Donald Trump not being able to keep it in his pants? Pecker. David Pecker. This week will be all about Pecker. Have at it. More on that later in the show. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme religious leader, signaled on Sunday that he would not retaliate against Israel, which retaliated against Iran after Iran fired more than 300 missiles into Israeli airspace a week ago this Sunday in retaliation for Israel's attack on the Syrian embassy earlier in the month, which was in retaliation for the Ayatollah saying the final season of Curb Your Enthusiasm was mediocre at best. I think that's where it all started. I'm not sure. During a meeting with Iran's top military leaders on Sunday, the Ayatollah praised his nation's unprecedented attack on Israel, adding, "It didn't matter that every single one of your missiles got shot out of the sky. It was still a demonstration of our country's firepower." So obviously, just like parents here in America, the Ayatollah believes in participation trophies as well. Come on, guys, it's not about wiping Israel off the face of the map. It's that you did your best. Speaker Mike Johnson did his best, defied the odds, passing 3 foreign aid packages, one for Israel, one for Taiwan and its neighbors, and the highly controversial foreign aid supplemental for Ukraine. Now, the question is, will the hardline pro-Putin wing of the GOP go ahead with Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate the chair? And with just a 1-vote majority in the House, will Republicans like Mike Johnson have to rely on House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries to come to his rescue and command that Democrats vote for Mike Johnson as a reward for finally stepping up on Ukraine? More on that later in the show. Meanwhile, Texas Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez, who has already been censured by the Texas Republican Party for not towing the MAGA line. Well, Republican Tony Gonzalez called fellow members of his Republican caucus scumbags. He called them scumbags yesterday for voting against the foreign aid package and then moving to get rid of Mike Johnson. Appearing on CNN yesterday, Republican Tony Gonzalez from Texas said, quote, "I serve with some real scumbags." Maybe they think that's a compliment. Then he mentioned them by name. Matt Gaetz, the Florida congressman who orchestrated former Speaker Kevin McCarthy's removal, and Bob Good, the Virginia Republican who currently heads the far-right Freedom Caucus. Gonzalez had nothing good to say about Matt Gaetz. Gonzalez said of Good, quote, Bob Good endorsed my opponent, a known neo-Nazi. These people used to walk around in white hoods at night. Now they're walking around with white hoods in the daytime. Then Congressman Gonzalez, Republican, turned his sights on Matt Gaetz, who is currently the subject of an ethics inquiry involving possible violations of the Mann Act, where Gaetz has been accused of bringing minors to Washington, D.C. for sex and other assorted crimes. Did I mention he's a Republican? Gonzalez said of Matt Gaetz, quote, Matt Gaetz, he paid minors to have sex with him at drug parties, unquote. The gloves remain off in the Republican Party. Well, you might remember Kevin McCarthy. Last year, he became the first speaker ever to be voted out in the middle of a Congress. It's never happened before. And that was all thanks to Matt Gaetz, who filed a motion to vacate the chair, and then he found 7 other Republicans to vote for Kevin McCarthy's removal. And Kevin McCarthy refers to them as the Crazy Eight. And McCarthy couldn't take it anymore. He left Congress in December, humiliated, in a rage that was specifically directed at Matt Gaetz. And he also left with a campaign war chest approaching $20 million, all of which he can keep for himself. But he's using some of that money to target the 8 House Republicans who voted against him. He's going to be running primary challengers to get even with the Crazy 8. Bob Good, chairman of the Freedom Caucus, voted to oust McCarthy. The Virginia congressional primaries are June 18th, and Kevin McCarthy is spending money on Bob Good's challenger. McCarthy's super PAC, American Prosperity Alliance, is targeting the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Bob Good, along with Nancy Mace of South Carolina. She has a primary coming up, and Kevin McCarthy is paying for a challenger, as well as Eli Crane of Arizona. All 3 voted to oust McCarthy. Mace's primary in South Carolina is June 11th, and Eli Crane of Arizona, his primary is July 30th. But McCarthy is saving all his powder for the man representing Florida's 1st congressional district, Matt Gaetz. In the past, when he had trouble with Matt Gaetz, McCarthy would nibble around the edges of Gaetz's troubles with the Ethics Committee. But last week, Kevin McCarthy was speaking to a group of students. It was being covered by C-SPAN, and he went after Matt Gaetz like he's never gone after him before.
And I'll give you the truth why I'm not speaker. It's because one person, a member of Congress, wanted me to stop an ethics complaint because he slept with a 17-year-old. An ethics complaint that started before I ever became speaker, and that's illegal, and I'm not going to get in the middle. Did he do it or not? I don't know. But ethics is looking at it. There's other people in jail because of it. And he wanted me to influence it.
Did he do it? I don't know. Ethics Committee's looking into it. I don't know. He's pissed at Matt Gaetz. I'll have more on the civil war inside the GOP, which rages on. And I'll tell you why I think Mike Johnson might actually survive Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate for the same reason I think Mike Johnson could survive, for the same reason Kevin McCarthy couldn't. Despite Mike Johnson's horrible politics, despite the fact that he's a repugnant human being, despite the fact that he lies about the 2020 presidential election, he is considered by those in the Republican Party as an honest broker, whereas Kevin McCarthy was seen as a liar who couldn't be trusted on either side of the aisle. So a little later on in the show, we'll talk about Mike Johnson. I can't stand Mike Johnson because he can't stand me and my friends, so I can't stand him. But he may be staying put for a while. He may have proven himself a capable leader of the Republican caucus. More on that later. Well, as I mentioned at the top of the show, opening statements in Donald Trump's criminal trial begin today. Trump is charged with falsifying documents to hide hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels, who Trump had unprotected sex with only weeks after Melania gave birth to their son. And he tried to keep that secret. And according to the indictments, he violated federal campaign finance laws. So this is going to be a rough 6, 7, maybe 8 weeks for Donald Trump. While Biden is out on the campaign trail and coming up in the polls, Donald Trump is stuck inside a courtroom, forced to sit still and keep his mouth shut. The Daily Beast reports that the judge in the case spent much of last week warning Donald Trump to keep his mouth shut or he'll be jailed. And the New York Times talked about this. At one point last week in the proceedings, the judge ordered Trump to sit like a dog. This is true. Sit. The judge was conferring with the defense attorneys, and Trump thought court was about to be adjourned, so he stood up to leave, and Judge Juan Merchan said, "Sit down. I'm not making this up." He said, "I haven't banged the gavel yet. Sit down." And Trump nodded his head like a frightened dog and sat down. Now, I'm hearing from people who knew Donald Trump before he was president, who know him a little, that this has to be taking a toll on him physically and mentally. This is not where he wants to be. Sitting still for 8 hours, being berated by a judge who he has to pretend he respects and he's subconsciously frightened of. And it's all building up inside of Donald Trump, and it's going to come out. It's going to come out. We don't know how, but it's going to come out. More importantly, the testimony that starts today is going to be humiliating, which is why Melania isn't on the campaign trail with him. You know where she is? She's showing up for the fundraisers. She did her third fundraiser this year with Donald because he made it clear to her that her exit package is going to be severely hampered because, just like everybody else, she and her lawyers are going to have to line up with all the other creditors who want his money. And they're coming for his money. That's why she's showing up for the fundraisers. As you know, the money that's donated to his presidential campaign is being used not just to pay his legal fees, but to pay his personal expenses, including Melania's stylist, hair and makeup. I'll go over that later on. I have some new reporting from USA Today about that. But they're coming for his money. Letitia James, the New York State Attorney General, who won a $500 million judgment proving that Donald Trump defrauded lenders, she's demanding this week in another courtroom here in Manhattan that Judge Arthur Engoron reject the $175 million bond that Donald Trump posted as a down payment on the $500 million fine that he's now appealing. The threat that is being made public is that Letitia James plans to start selling off Trump's New York properties, which he doesn't even own, starting next week. That's not going to happen. But she's humiliating Donald Trump, and she's creating this cloud over him that really is a threat to his masculinity. She keeps reminding everybody that Donald Trump doesn't have the money for his $175 million bond. So it's going to be bad this week for Donald Trump. Really bad. Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer and fixer, you might remember, was sentenced to 3 years in prison for committing one of the very crimes that Donald Trump is charged with in this trial. Everybody said of the 4 trials, criminal trials, this is the runt of the litter. Well, Michael Cohen served time, got sentenced to 3 years in prison, served time for one of the charges that Trump has been indicted for. Cohen is now out of prison, and he is prepared to testify in this trial against Donald Trump. He's planning to tell the jury that Trump ordered him to set up shell companies in order to pay Stormy Daniels, and through the shell companies, Michael Cohen would then reimburse Stormy Daniels, or if it's Karen McDougal or the doorman at Donald Trump, who was telling the National Enquirer that Donald fathered a child out of wedlock with one of the housekeepers at Trump Tower. The $30,000 would be paid by the National Enquirer, and then Michael Cohen would pay the National Enquirer to reimburse them for catching and killing the doorman's story. And then Trump, according to the indictment, arranged that Cohen would be reimbursed by Donald Trump by billing Donald Trump's company for legal services he never provided. So in one instance, Michael Cohen took a loan against one of his properties, used the cash, I believe, to pay off Stormy Daniels. It was $36,000, and then he billed the Trump Organization over a 12-month period for legal services that he never provided. It's illegal, it's fraud, it's forgery, and it violates campaign finance laws. Alan Weisselberg was the Trump Organization's chief financial officer since the time of Fred Trump. Alan Weisselberg goes all the way back to Fred Trump. And Fred Trump said, "Keep my son out of trouble." Well, Alan Weisselberg approved the payments on these phony charges that Michael Cohen submitted to the Trump Organization. But Alan Weisselberg kept his promise to the late, great KKK member Fred Trump, and he was going to testify on behalf of Donald Trump. But he can't, because he's now serving a 5-month jail sentence on Rikers Island again. He's back in Rikers Island after he pleaded guilty last month to lying under oath during Letitia James' New York State civil fraud trial. Again, this is Alan Weisselberg. This is the CFO, the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization. This is his second go at Rikers Island. Last year, you might remember, he did time after the Trump Organization was convicted in another civil lawsuit, and Weisselberg pled guilty to grand larceny, criminal tax fraud, and falsifying business records. That was a separate trial. The Trump Organization was sued as well by the state. I believe it was the city of New York that sued him, that sued his company. You can sue companies. Well, Alan Weisselberg promised Fred Trump he would take care of the son and lie under oath and serve as a character witness, but he can't because he's been put back in Rikers Island. But you know who Donald Trump's attorneys are now reaching out to testify on behalf of Donald Trump? This is how desperate Trump's attorneys are for a character witness. They're now reaching out to Stormy Daniels' old attorney, Michael Avenatti. Remember Michael Avenatti? Oh, my mother had such a crush on him. For one brief moment back in 2018, there was talk of Michael Avenatti running against Trump in 2020. He had like a 7-month window. He was all over MSNBC and CNN, and he was sticking it to Trump as Stormy Daniels' attorney, and he laid out the case. He laid it all out there for the world that then President Donald Trump paid hush money to my client, Stormy Daniels, in the lead up to the 2016 presidential election. He laid out why these hush money payments were criminal, how it involved forging documents and violating campaign finance laws. And oy, did my mother have a crush on Michael Avenatti for maybe a half a year. Women loved him. And then he disappeared. What happened to Michael Avenatti? Like he's no longer on with Rachel or Joy Reid or CNN. In December of 2022, Michael Avenatti was sentenced to 19 years. 19 years in prison without parole. Michael Avenatti is serving 19 years in prison without parole for stealing millions from his clients and extortion. In other words, he's an attorney. Every attorney should be doing 19 years in prison, especially divorce attorneys. But now, Michael Avenatti, in an exclusive interview with Rupert Murdoch's New York Post, says he's been contacted by Donald Trump's attorneys to see if he, Michael Avenatti, would be interested in testifying on behalf of Trump. Now, he's doing time right now for stealing money from Stormy Daniels. And Trump's attorneys are so desperate, they're saying, would you like to testify against Stormy Daniels on behalf of Donald Trump? That's a character witness, the guy who stole the hush money from Stormy Daniels. Avenatti said he's thinking about testifying from prison. He says he's not doing this because if Trump gets reelected, that there would be some pardon in the future. Of course not. Trump takes the pardon process very seriously. He would never pardon somebody as payback. Like, he would never pardon his old campaign managers, Paul Manafort or Steve Bannon or Roger Stone or Jared Kushner's father. He would never do that. He takes the pardon process very seriously. I'm lying. He pardoned all of them. Rudy, at one time, said he was selling pardons for like $2 million, that Trump was, that's what, the woman who was suing Rudy for wage theft and rape claims that Rudy told her that he and Trump were selling pardons in late 2020 and early 2021 for $2 million each. Like I said, the walls are closing in on Donald Trump. In this criminal trial, if convicted, Trump could face, I'm told, possibly 4 years in prison at the most. But I'm being told it's unlikely that he'll do any time if he's found guilty in this trial. I'm also told it's not likely he'll do time after he's found guilty of violating the Espionage Act down in Miami if that trial ever begins. But the election interference trial in D.C. is serious, and it's not going to stop. This week, oral arguments begin before the Supreme Court to determine whether Trump, as an ex-president, has absolute immunity once he leaves office for any crimes he might have committed in the White House. I'll have more on this later in the week. So Trump, he's a sociopath, but he's aware of danger. He knows he's in danger. He knows he's looking at a special counsel, Jack Smith, who wants Donald Trump in lockup. And Donald Trump also knows that all he can do right now is delay that trial until the election, until after the election. He's planning to win. But if he loses in November, he can't pardon himself. He can't order his Justice Department to drop the charges against him. Everything is riding on November, and he knows that. So what this criminal trial, which they call the runt of the litter, what this criminal trial will succeed in doing is humiliate Donald Trump in the court of public opinion. For the next 6, 7, possibly 8 weeks, there will be nonstop coverage of how Donald Trump cheated on Melania without a condom right after she gave birth to their son. I said this, 2 months ago when he locked up the nomination? He would have benefited from a tighter race for the nomination because that would have distracted from these trials. But instead, he's the presumptive nominee. And there's no horse race anymore. So we turn to the criminal trials. And while Biden is out there forgiving student loans, signing executive orders to close the gun show loophole, Trump is spending his spring sitting in a dingy Manhattan courtroom having the life sucked out of him. Did you see him Friday complaining about it's freezing in there? It's freezing. It's like an old man. He's turning into an old man. They're going to give him a blanket, and he'll take some horse tranquilizers or more horse tranquilizers, and he'll sleep. That's what he's on something. To make life even scarier for Donald Trump, Benny Thompson was the chairman of the January 6th committee. And last week, he introduced this piece of legislation that, if passed, would deny any convicted felon Secret Service protection if they've been convicted of a crime and are forced to do time in prison. The thinking is, if Trump goes to prison, no Secret Service protection for him. So, Trump is fighting to stay out of prison. He's fighting this on two fronts. There are his legal fees, and he's reportedly spent $60 million on legal fees just last year alone. He didn't spend it. His super PAC spent $60 million on legal fees last year. That's one front in this war to stay out of prison. And the other front is getting elected so that he can theoretically keep himself out of prison. You know, if he's convicted in Georgia or here in Manhattan, theoretically, he can't pardon himself out of that. And theoretically, I've read some think that a United States president could be forced to serve time if the convictions come down before he's elected president. Honestly, people complain when I say he's not going to go to prison. False expectations create depression and disappointment. I'm sorry. I would love to see him locked up for life, but I don't think he's going to prison over this Manhattan criminal trial. I could lie to you, but I just don't think. I think he's going to be convicted. I just don't think he's going to go to jail because of if he's convicted in this Manhattan trial. He does know that he has to win in November to keep his pasty white ass out of prison, possibly without Secret Service protection, because if he loses in November, when he loses in November, Jack Smith is coming at him for wire fraud. It's never going to end. So he's fighting this war on two fronts, and it involves allocating resources, money. How do I spend the money coming in? How much do I spend on my criminal attorneys, and how much do I spend on not needing criminal attorneys by becoming president? How much do I spend on legal fees, and how much do I spend on my campaign? And Trump knows this. He's sitting, stewing in the courtroom today, knowing that not only is Joe Biden coming up in the polls and being able to campaign, unlike Donald Trump, Joe Biden's crushing Trump when it comes to raising money. Trump in 2020, but really in 2016, could rely on small donors. Right now, he's got about half the number of small donors than he had in 2016. He now has to rely on the heavy hitters, the hedge fund managers, and they aren't delivering the way they are for Joe Biden, who is outraising Trump, some say, by as much as 40%. And Biden is now spending it. He's blanketing the swing states with attack ads against Donald Trump. I told you about these ads. They're really cruel. They're really mean. And Trump isn't running any ads because he doesn't have the money. Why is there no money? Because the Republican Party that he's hijacked by putting Lara as one of the co-chairs, the RNC and his super PAC are spending all that money on lawyers. Politico reports that Trump's decision to spend practically all his super PAC money on lawyers is leaving him little to nothing to spend on his campaign, as well as little to nothing, more importantly, to spend on stylists for Melania. As I said earlier, the super PAC pays for her grooming when she needs her anal glands expressed I'm sorry, that's talking about someone else. But, when she's taken to the groomer, that's paid. I think that's what groomers do for trophy wives. They express their anal sacs. Maybe I'm confused. No, that's what you do for your dog. But all of that has been paid for 8 years now, has been paid for by Trump's super PAC. But Trump has lost the small donor base, and he's relying on wealthier Americans. But wealthy Americans, unlike the small donor base, they know, the wealthy Americans know their contributions aren't going towards getting Donald Trump elected. They know that money that they would donate to Donald Trump is for getting him elected so they can get those tax cuts renewed. They know it's all going to lawyers. So they're being less generous. Now, do you want to know what this election is about? It is about one thing if you're Donald Trump and the donors. The tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts for the rich expire next year. Joe Biden has promised not to renew them when he's elected. This is what the election is about, at least for Donald Trump and his Republican donors. That's it. Everything else is noise. Abortion, critical race theory. This is about the Trump era tax cuts, which added $8 trillion to our national debt. Biden gets reelected, they expire. Trump is going to renew them. That's what the election is about. The New York Times reported earlier this month that Trump spent $100 million of super PAC money on legal fees in total since he left the Oval Office. And that's what we know of. And as I've gone over this, this is why when he loses, Jack Smith is coming after him for wire fraud to look into, you raised a couple of $100 million for the Save America PAC. Where'd the rest of it go? Politico now reports with Biden closing in on Trump in the polls, passing him by in others, Trump's super PAC is all out of money. The Save America PAC is all out of money. Since the beginning of 2023, the Save America PAC spent $60 million on legal fees. Meanwhile, his official campaign committee is spending practically nothing on his reelection and is actually repaying money to the Save America super PAC that it had borrowed, so the super PAC can continue paying Donald Trump's legal fees. Not only that, Trump is taking from the RNC. They've worked out a split. Trump gets the first cut of any money donated to the RNC. As a result, the RNC has half of what the Democratic National Committee has in its war chest. How are they going to afford a convention? How are they going to do the convention? There's no, and all that money is going towards legal fees. USA Today reports this morning that Donald Trump is taking campaign money, not only for his legal fees, but he's using it to prop up all his failing businesses. USA Today reports Trump's joint fundraising committee with the Republican Party, the RNC. The RNC cut a check for $411,287 to Mar-a-Lago for use of the resort for fundraising in February and March alone. Donald Trump is charging the Republican Party for 2 months $411,287 for use of Mar-a-Lago. The Republican Party also cut a $62,337 check to Donald Trump's Miami Doral Hotel for fundraising for 1 month. Campaign contributions are also being used to pay for his jet, Melania's clothes, her hair, her makeup, her stylist, not to express her anal sex. Anal sex, that has nothing to do with Melania. That's what you do with a French poodle. He charges the RNC for rent at Trump Tower. Now, we saw him do this while he was president. He went from using the Republican Party as a cash cow to using the federal government. When Trump, as president, traveled to one of his properties, as president, the Secret Service was charged $1,185 per night to stay at one of his crappy properties. This happened 40 times during his presidency. Like once a month, one of his properties would charge the Secret Service $1,185 per night for the honor, the privilege of keeping him alive. So you can be certain that right now, any donations coming into the Trump campaign that are not going to the lawyers, well, they're going to one of hundreds of Donald Trump shell companies that he created that provide catering, entertainment, travel, printing, for any campaign-related expenses. We know that he's told all down-ballot Republican candidates, if you use my name or likeness in a campaign email or campaign ad, you have to give me a 5% cut at the very least of what you raise. He's going to be charging, in 2 months, he's going to be charging for endorsements. If food is being served at a fundraiser, I guarantee you, he's got some shell company that's catering, and he's getting the money. And as I showed you, any fundraising done at Mar-a-Lago for the GOP, Trump bills the RNC and his super PAC for use of the ballroom, the liquor. It's the art of the kickback. The art of the kickback. It doesn't stop for this poor guy. The civil lawsuits keep on rolling along. Guy's pushing 80, and if he doesn't end up back in the White House, he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, and the only time he's going to get out of prison is to go testify in the hundreds of civil lawsuits that are being filed against him. I mean, he is remarkable, right? I would be curled up in a fetal position, but not Trump. Fecal, he's in a fecal position, but not a fetal position. All he does is get sued now. A judge last week refused to block a civil lawsuit filed by members of Congress and Capitol police officers for the physical and or emotional damages they suffered on January 6th, which in their civil lawsuit, they blame on Donald Trump. All right, bad news piling up for Donald Trump all this week, but it's not all bad. Remember Bill Barr, his attorney general, who rewrote the Mueller report so it looked like Trump wasn't guilty of a cover-up, even though the entire second half of the Mueller report was a roadmap for convicting Donald Trump for obstruction of justice? Read the second half of the Mueller report. It was, here's how you convict Donald Trump for obstruction of justice. Do you remember Bill Barr in the final days of the Trump presidency washing his hands of Trump after the 2020 presidential election, when he looked into evidence of voter fraud and said he couldn't find any, said it publicly? Trump screamed at him. Barr resigned. This is the same Bill Barr who for the past 2 years has been defending the special counsel, Jack Smith, especially the prosecution of Donald Trump for violating the Espionage Act. Last week, Bill Barr said he's voting for Donald Trump. Donald Trump, who he said lacks the disposition to be commander-in-chief, he said giving 4 more years to Donald Trump would be like playing Russian roulette. Russian is the operative word there. Bill Barr said he can't be trusted with the nuclear launch codes, but last week, to remain relevant, I'm still voting for Donald Trump. He said if I have to choose between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it's safer for the country to have Donald Trump in the Oval Office. What a man. What a man of integrity. So that was good for Donald Trump. Got an endorsement from Bill Barr. And there was no court over the weekend. They get the weekends off. And Trump got a much-needed opportunity to fly down to Wilmington, North Carolina, for a big rally on Saturday night. And that always reinvigorates Donald Trump and re-energizes him. And he got to see some of his old buddies. He was planning to see his old buddies. The Proud Boys showed up, at least the ones not doing 10 to 20 years for seditious conspiracy. That's what they were convicted of, seditious conspiracy, for the role they played on January 6th. But it was great to see some of them still standing back and standing by at that Trump rally. To kick off the proceedings. This is what Donald Trump needed to get outside, to get that love that he's not getting from Melania or Judge Juan Merchan, just to be outside where he can pass wind and not have the judge bang the gavel and order his attorney to control his client's sphincter. You all know about that. Trump is passing wind aggressively in the court. But anyway, to kick off the proceedings in Wilmington, North Carolina, a local pastor delivered a benediction. Let's listen.
Now, God, your blessings upon this event, every speaker, and most importantly, we pray your blessings upon President Donald J. Trump. And, oh God, we pray as he travels here today that you would give him a sense of mercy and grace. Lord, we thank you that you use imperfect people to do perfect things, and we thank you.
We think he said, I don't know if you heard him, he said, God uses imperfect people to do perfect things. Listen again. Here we go.
Lord, we thank you that you use imperfect people to do perfect things, and we thank you.
Yeah, God uses imperfect people to do perfect things, and we thank you. This is how Mike Johnson, this is how the evangelical community square Trump's personal life and his crimes. He's imperfect, but he does perfect things. Yes, Trump is imperfect, but he does perfect things, like carry on a year-long affair with a Playboy playmate while Melania is pregnant with their son. Then after Melania gives birth to Trump's son, just weeks after she gives him a son, Donald thanks her by having unprotected sex with a porn star. That's perfect. Just perfect. Go ahead, Pastor.
And God, we pray that you might visit this place today and that we might know that we've been in the presence of patriots, but that we've been in the presence of our Almighty God as well.
Oh, he invited God to make his presence known at the Trump rally Saturday in Wilmington, North Carolina. Well, let's see. Did God show up? He was invited.
There seems to be some thunder and lightning, and it's a pretty big storm.
So Trump phoned in from the plane, and it turns out, even though God is busy, he made his presence known. God showed up, which is why Donald Trump didn't. Here is Donald Trump on the phone from the jet, speaking to his MAGA morons.
Trump, your favorite president of all time, hopefully. As you can see, there's some very bad weather heading in, and we're flying in a few minutes, but they really would prefer that we not come in because there's a certain danger to all of this, and we want to make sure that everybody is safe above all. And so they've asked us to ask people to leave the site and seek shelter.
Leave the site. See, prayer works. By the way, that is Marjorie. I'm not making this up. That is Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend, the guy in the herringbone jacket. Is that a herringbone jacket? I'm not saying this guy drinks, but if you look at him, he's one of the hosts on RSBN, and he's dating Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm not saying he drinks. I'm just saying he, to me, looks very puffy, and the kind of puffiness that I've noticed that men get when they are sleeping with a witch. But I'm not saying he drinks. I'm just saying, in my opinion, he looks like he's bearing a lot of shame. Anyway, so God made his presence known. It's interesting. Last week when New York had that earthquake, coupled with the eclipse, Marjorie Taylor Greene and all the other uneducated, illiterate, brain-dead MAGA morons said, oh, these are signs from God. The eclipse and the earthquake, these are signs from God. No, it's called science. But no Biden rally had to be canceled on account of the earthquake or the eclipse. So if you're looking for signs of God, from God, Marjorie, let's listen to Donald Trump. Here he is, bowing out of that big rally.
But they're saying the weather is really getting bad, really, really getting bad. So we have to rely on the Weather Service and some of the officials.
Yeah, we have to rely on the Weather Service and cancel. But don't worry, when I'm elected, according to my friends over at the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, we're going to privatize that Weather Service. And I can assure you, once my donors are in charge of the Weather Service, you'll be able to stand outside at all my rallies getting struck by lightning to your heart's content. Bunch of morons. Just worthless human beings. Worthless. Zeros. Well, MAGA morons love doing their own research because just like Trump, they don't trust science, especially when the science makes you look bad. You know, like COVID. COVID makes Donald Trump look bad. Donald ignored the science and completely crapped the bed. And because he crapped the bed, 1 million Americans died from COVID. Why? Because he has no idea how science or government works. He has no idea how to harness the power of the federal government. So he couldn't get ventilators or protective equipment where they were needed. Joe Biden, 40, 50 years of government service, his first 90 days in office, hundreds of millions of COVID vaccines out the door, along with all the necessary ventilators and protective equipment that our first responders needed. 4 years ago, Trump was president, and America was dying from COVID. Now, thanks to the vaccine being pushed out the door by Joe Biden, COVID is not the national health emergency it once was. Thanks to the vaccine, getting COVID is no longer a death sentence, especially for people who have comorbidities. I love the MAGA morons who try to post on my channel or at my website when I point this out, when I say Biden got the hundreds of millions of vaccines out the door his first 90 days in office, and the MAGA morons, these illiterate, knuckle-dragging, mouth-breathing, sister-sniffing, worthless scumbags, they say, but it was Trump's Operation Warp Speed that created that vaccine. And I say, oh, so you want to give Trump credit for the vaccine? That's interesting. Are you vaccinated? No. Okay. Let's have more of their kind in charge. Hey, I want these people to determine what books should and shouldn't be read in our schools. Well, COVID, we haven't even touched COVID yet. I think after the convention is when Biden is going to say, hey, remember what it was like 4 years ago when this cretin was running things? Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about COVID, and that's why the Boston Globe reports this morning, headline, for Donald Trump, COVID has become a 4-letter word. And I love that headline because for Trump and his supporters, they don't want to talk about COVID. It's a 4-letter word, which is perfect because it's actually a 5-letter word. Right? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's a 5-letter. The headline is saying Trump's not only bad at science, he's also bad at counting. Unless the Boston Globe thinks it's a 4-letter word. I know the Boston Globe has a lot of Harvard morons editing that newspaper. So who knows? Maybe they think it's a 4-letter word too, because anybody who graduates from Harvard is a worthless piece of shit, except for Ethan Hirschenfeld. Are you watching him every night at 9 p.m. here on YouTube? Ethan Hirschenfeld, funniest man in the world. Well, that had to be disappointing for Donald Trump. You know, he spent the week in court. He was really hoping, to give a speech, calling people stupid and ugly and fat. But God made his presence known, just like the dumb pastor prayed he would, or she would, or they would. I think God is a they. And Trump couldn't put on a show for the imbeciles. And he had to slink back to Manhattan. And all he's got to look forward to is today. He's got to sit in the trial today for 8, maybe 10 hours. Poor baby. Poor baby. On this program, I always talk about the 5 states in 2020 that Joe Biden won that Hillary didn't. They are Georgia, Arizona, and then, of course, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And it's important to keep in mind that Biden wins Michigan, wins Wisconsin, wins Pennsylvania, he gets to 270. If he loses Wisconsin, then he can swap out Georgia or Arizona and maybe North Carolina. Nevada. Now, it's been blue since Obama won it in 2008. It's never been solidly blue. It's tight. Joe Biden beat Trump there in 2020 by about 34,000 votes. Hillary beat Trump by 27,000 votes. The Democrats I speak to tell me Biden is not that worried about Nevada. But it's always the thing you're not worried about that comes back to bite you in the ass. They say it's a given that Nevada is going to be hard and tight, but in the end, Biden will win it. One of the reasons Joe Biden has a pretty good chance in Nevada again is because the Republican Party is broke in Nevada because of Donald Trump. All their money is getting spent on legal fees, but not Donald Trump's legal fees. They're getting spent on legal fees because back in December, 6 Nevada Republicans, including state party chairman Michael McDonald, were indicted by a Nevada grand jury in the false elector scheme. So, if you remember, Joe Biden in 2020 won Nevada, but that wasn't going to stop Trump from talking party chair Michael McDonald into forging documents and creating his own slate of fake, phony electors to send to Washington on January 6, 2020. And Republican Party chair Michael McDonald's trial begins in 2025. He's still the Republican chair. And Trump can't pardon him. Even if Trump wins in 2025, it was a Nevada grand jury. Mike McDonald is a former police officer. This is the chairman of the Republican Party in Nevada. Mr. Law and Order, former police officer in Nevada. So you know he's clean. McDonald was accused of stealing money from a charity for sick kids. He was accused of stealing money from a charity for sick kids. That's another thing he has in common with Donald Trump. He's going on trial, and he stole money from sick kids, a charity. Actually, Trump was found guilty of stealing from sick kids. McDonald wasn't. I should clarify that, at least not yet. And McDonald was accused, this is a former cop, became a city councilman. He was accused of accepting bribes from several of Nevada's biggest strip clubs. Sure, the dollars were rolled up. And anyway, McDonald's, he hasn't been convicted of anything. But in 2025, he goes on trial in the phony elector scheme, and he's still chairman of the Nevada GOP. It's going to be distracted winning Nevada for Donald Trump because the false elector trial is coming up. And as I said, even if Trump somehow makes it back into the Oval Office, he doesn't have the pardon power to get McDonald out of prison for a state crime. Now, to make things even worse for Trump in Nevada, abortion, as of last week, abortion will be on the ballot in Nevada. We've gone over this. This election for voters is abortion. For the people Trump works for, it's about renewing the Trump tax cuts. But this election is now about abortion, the last thing Donald Trump wanted. And the Nevada Supreme Court on April 18th, last week, gave the go-ahead for the Nevada Right to Reproductive Freedom Amendment. The Nevada Right to Reproductive Freedom Amendment. They gave the go-ahead for it to appear on the November ballot. The initiative, if passed, would amend Nevada's state constitution to guarantee a woman's right to an abortion. And Nevada, if you check your map, is right next door to Arizona, which, as you all know, they're about to put into effect a law dating back to 1864 that makes abortion illegal at the moment of conception. No exceptions. And while the Attorney General of Arizona is a Democrat and she promises not to enforce this law, Republicans in the state legislature of Arizona show no sign of caving into pressure from Arizona Senate candidate Kari Lake and Donald Trump, who have been working the phones saying, this is political malpractice, get rid of this law, we want to win here. And these Republicans in Arizona, the lawmakers, are saying, oh no, we really believe this. I know you're running for the tax cuts for the rich back east, but we really believe abortion is murder. They're not listening to Donald Trump or Kari Lake in Arizona, which is also bad for Donald Trump come November. He's pissing off his evangelical base. In Nevada, you can be certain women in Nevada are paying attention to what's going on in Arizona. They want to make sure this Republican cancer doesn't spread into Nevada. So just exactly the way Joe Biden planned, abortion will be on the ballot come November in Nevada, which means Democrats who might be lukewarm about Biden are going to show up to protect a woman's reproductive freedom, which is especially important in Nevada. And while they're there protecting women's reproductive rights, they're going to stay and vote for Joe Biden. Very bad news for Donald Trump and his down ballot candidates. A new NBC News poll out this morning shows Joe Biden and Donald Trump neck and neck in a statistical dead heat, with Trump beating Biden by 2%, but that's within the margin of error. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something I told you when Bobby Kennedy first declared. When you add Robert F. Kennedy Jr. into the mix, new polling from NBC shows This is what I told you, that Bobby Kennedy ends up peeling away more votes from Trump than he does Joe Biden. In a three-way race, Biden beats Trump by 2 points when Bobby Kennedy is on the ballot. Okay, so Bobby Kennedy is going to be irrelevant after the convention. But why is this important? Because third-party candidates can sometimes strip away much-needed votes. And Bobby Kennedy just qualified for the ballot in Michigan. I just went over that. Michigan is a key battleground state where some think Joe Biden might be vulnerable thanks to Michigan's large Arab population, infuriated by Joe Biden's support for Israel. And they're even angrier now that Biden succeeded in pushing through Congress on Saturday a supplemental that provides Israel with $26 billion in military aid. $9 billion is also given in humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. I've already pointed out that you wouldn't need to give the Palestinians humanitarian aid if you stop giving military aid to the Israelis. But I started saying that a month ago, and then I've seen it said on other late-night programs, so I'm going to stop saying that. Well, so is Joe Biden vulnerable in Michigan? Possibly. In the past couple of weeks, we've learned, and so you've got Bobby Kennedy Jr., who made the ballot in Michigan. And we've learned who Bobby Kennedy really is. A lot of you already know who Bobby Kennedy is. I feel I'm like Cheryl Hines. I was talking to my sister about Cheryl Hines, who's married to Bobby Kennedy, and she said, how could she stand him? And I said, it's Bobby Kennedy. How could you not fall in love with Bobby Kennedy? And it's like falling in love with a really special, it's like, that's not all he is. And so anyway, but all of you, I'm a sucker for the Kennedys. So, and his father. So, yeah, I understand why Cheryl Hines is head over heels over Bobby Kennedy. So we've learned who is funding Bobby Kennedy. His big donors are identical to Donald Trump's. They think, let's put Bobby Kennedy on the ballot, and the Kennedy name will steal votes away from Joe Biden. But Democrats are not that stupid. Democrats actually pay attention to the issues, and they know who Bobby Kennedy is. And they go, I don't think so. We learned about Rita Palma, the chairwoman of Bobby Kennedy's New York State campaign, who was forced to step down last week after she was caught on tape telling Republican donors the purpose of running Bobby Kennedy in New York is to siphon votes away from Joe Biden and make it easier for Donald Trump to carry New York in November. Palma also turned out to be an anti-vaxxer who showed up to hear Trump's speech on the Ellipse, January 6. We don't know if she went into the Capitol. She insisted the people who stormed it that day were 99% peaceful. Okay. Do you see a pattern here? People ask me, how do you come up with positions? Well, I don't. But I notice patterns, and I know whose team I want to be on. I look towards people who are smarter than I am, Ralph Nader, Bernie Sanders, what do they think? Robert Reich. And then I look at people who are dumber than I am, like Jimmy Dore or Kurt Metzger or Joe Rogan. And then I go, oh, okay. They think this and they're certain about it. Okay, that's interesting. You see, the same people who are anti-vax, they support Trump. They won't admit they support Trump, but they support Trump. They deny science. They deny the 2020 election. They deny January 6th was an insurrection. So how does that inform my opinion when it comes to the Ukraine supplemental? Well, I've noticed those are the same exact people who are rooting for Russia. So I have zero certitude about a lot of things, but I pay attention to those who do. The same people who are against vaccines, they won't get the shot, but they love guns. They won't get the shot, but they love shooting things. They're anti-cancel culture, but they're pro-book banning. They deny climate science, medical science, the 2020 election, and January 6th. They deny that it was an insurrection. All those people, this basket of deplorables, as Hillary would say, all of them are now insisting that Ukraine is persecuting Christians because Ukraine is run by Nazis. That kind of helps me form an opinion of where I stand on the Ukraine supplemental. If these people are against the Ukraine supplemental, Tucker Carlson, Jimmy Dore, Kurt Metzger, Jackson Stinkle, I know where I stand then. By the way, a lot of people got pissed off at the New York Times for their story on Jackson Hinkle. They said, oh, you're normalizing Jackson Hinkle by doing a story about him in the New York Times. Read the effing story. It was anything but normalizing Jackson Hinkle. They destroyed Jackson Hinkle. Do more than just read headlines and look at pictures. The story in the New York Times was they eviscerated, they filleted Jackson Hinkle. They exposed him as the con artist he really is. Well, back to Bobby Kennedy. He's got brothers and sisters, and some of them stood with President Biden in Philadelphia last week and said, nope, we're endorsing Joe Biden for president, not our brother, who we think is irresponsible. And they have publicly asked Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to drop out of the race. But maybe since he's peeling votes away from Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Trump's idiot big money donors are funding Bobby Kennedy Jr., maybe we want him to stay in the race. Rudy Giuliani. Here's an update. I love all the pain that Rudy Giuliani finds himself in. He's in bankruptcy court. Good. He's a racist. He's destroyed lives. He's in bankruptcy court claiming he can't pay the mother-daughter Georgia election workers the $148 million after he defaulted on a defamation lawsuit filed after Rudy continued and continues to lie, claiming these two women were stuffing ballots for Joe Biden back in 2020. You know who these women are. They received so many racially tinged death threats. People showed up outside their home. They were forced to go into hiding. Well, Rudy says, I have no money left. I can't pay you the $148 million. And so his creditors have joined together, and they want to find out who owes Rudy Giuliani money so they could put a lien on all his accounts receivable. He's going to be 80. This is how he's finishing up. Rudy told the bankruptcy court that Donald Trump owes him $2 million for the work that Rudy did in the lead up to January 6, where he lost 60 court hearings around the country trying to prove voter fraud. He said Trump owes him $2 million for that. Trump hasn't paid him for this so-called work. So the creditors have subpoenaed Trump to find out, are you planning to pay Rudy? And Trump isn't paying him. Rudy shows up at Mar-a-Lago, gets drunk. Trump sees him, and Rudy starts crying and saying, my life is over. It's been ruined. I think I'm dreaming. I keep waiting to wake up from this nightmare. And Trump is sitting there with all his donors laughing at what Trump did to Rudy. I mean, Rudy was always a fraud. He was always a bad guy. He was always a racist. But had he not gotten close to Donald Trump, he could have skated into his 80s without getting his legal license suspended in D.C. and New York and facing prison sentence in Georgia. I mean, he's looking at a prison sentence in that RICO trial. From what I've heard is he's offered to flip, and he was told, no, you don't understand. Other people flip so we can get you. You're the big fish. It's you, Donald Trump, and Mark Meadows. Does that make you feel better, Rudy? You're a big shot. And a subpoena has also been delivered to Rudy's idiot son, Andrew, who welcomed Moms for Liberty when they spoke in New York City 2 months ago. Rudy's idiot son, Andrew, you might remember he ran for governor of New York, and he won. Oh, no, he didn't. I'm sorry. I don't even think Andrew Giuliani voted for himself. So Giuliani's son got subpoenaed by the creditors. So I guess they think Rudy Giuliani's idiot, worthless son either owes his worthless father, who should have never been born. Apparently, they either think Andrew Giuliani owes his dad money, or more probably is hiding, just conjecture here, not about him being an idiot and worthless. It's not conjecture that Rudy Giuliani should never have been born and married his cousin. His first wife was his cousin. That's not conjecture, but creditors may think that Andrew could be allegedly hiding some of Rudy's money. And also subpoenaed by the creditors is his former aide, his former assistant, who is suing Rudy for wage theft and rape. Giuliani's assistant, in her lawsuit, said America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani, chomped on Viagra like they were breath mints and forced her to garnish his knob with her lips while, and I'm not making this up, while he talked on the phone with Donald Trump, and then raped her. And he turns 80 this year. Is there a worse human being on the planet than Rudy Giuliani? Donald Trump. maybe. This is the mop-up for April 22nd, 2024. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. And, of course, subscribe to this channel. And if you want to help me, if you really want to help me, copy and paste the link to this episode and share it via email, text, or social media with your friends. That's the best way to help me. And if you want to hurt me, and why wouldn't you, don't do that. And it really hurts if you don't do that. By the way, this is an audio podcast. It's always been an audio podcast. So download this show wherever you get your audio podcasts and make sure to leave a comment down below. I read all your comments unless you're a Trump supporter. Why would I read people who can't read? So I know we have Trump supporters who listen to the show and try to leave comments. Keep trying. You're really easy to spot. Trust me. It's really easy to ferret out the ferrets. And that's what you are. You vote for Trump, you should have never been born. Really. Seriously. You're a mental defect. The National Rifle Association avoided yet another lengthy trial challenging its finances by agreeing to settle with the Washington, D.C. Attorney General, whose cases against the gun lobbyist, I'm looking at a news story, and I have my notes scribbled, and okay. Shall we try it? Should I try to tell you the story again? Or should I just tell people who vote for Trump that they're worthless? If they're in your life, get rid of them. Just don't take their calls. Anyway, the National Rifle Association, they avoided yet another lengthy trial. Remember the one in New York State, Letitia James? This one was in Washington, D.C., the Washington, D.C. Attorney General. This is not a federal case. It's just the Washington, D.C. Well, in a way it is federal, but it's the Washington, D.C. Attorney General who was suing the NRA, and the trial was scheduled to begin on the 29th, a week from today. It was accusing the heads of the NRA of using millions of dollars in charitable donations as their own personal piggy bank. They have a new president over at the NRA. Wayne LaPierre is gone. The new president is Charles Cotton, and he called this 4-year-old lawsuit politically motivated. But to settle, he agreed to establish an auditing committee that will make sure charitable donations are not used for luxury travel and instead will be spent on the NRA's core mission, which I believe is killing school children. I think that's what they were set up to do. I'm a little unfamiliar with the NRA, but from what I've been reading, it's a charitable nonprofit, and people donate so school children are shot and murdered. You might remember 2 months ago, oh yes, who's worse than Rudy Giuliani? Wayne LaPierre, who up until 2 months ago was the head of the NRA. 2 months ago, New York State Attorney General Letitia James, in her civil lawsuit, won her case filed against several of the NRA's big honchos, including Wayne LaPierre, the longtime leader of the NRA, who retired right before the trial began. The jury ruled that LaPierre would have to pay back $5.4 million that he stole from the NRA, although Letitia James's original lawsuit charged him with stealing as much as $45 million from the organization. Well, good riddance to Wayne LaPierre. Too bad we're not locking him up. A lot of blood on that man's hands. President Biden signed into law a 2-year extension for Section 2 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It allows the National Security Agency to share with our FBI information about American citizens, and they don't need a warrant. This just passed. Mike Johnson got this passed on Saturday. It expired on Friday. Section 702 expired on Friday, but the National Security Agency said, well, it expired, but we were still going to be able to use it for another year. And they never explained why. They said, no, yeah, it expired on Friday, but we were still going to share information with the FBI for another year without a warrant. This is creating this is where Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan are on the right side, but for the wrong reasons. I'll explain in a second. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act allows American intelligence agencies to intercept electronic communications of foreign nationals. These would be people who travel to and from the United States. Now, because foreign nationals are in the United States, they end up talking to American citizens, either as friends or business associates, and the electronic surveillance of these foreign nationals overseas, well, they swoop up conversations and emails and texts that they have with American citizens, and the FBI says, hey, can we see the surveillance that you have on American citizens who are talking to foreign nationals? And the NSA shares that product with the FBI without a warrant. You think that's a good idea? Civil libertarians on both sides of the aisle, including the ACLU, the good guys, and the bad guys like House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan, they were demanding Section 2. This is what just got renewed. They were demanding it get rewritten so that the FBI would need a warrant to see any of the NSA's surveillance of American citizens. Well, why is Jim Jordan, why is Marjorie Taylor Greene on the right side of this for the wrong reason? Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene were upset by the FBI misusing Section 702 because NSA surveillance served as the basis for the FBI's 2016 Crossfire Hurricane investigation that was authorized by President Obama to look into Donald Trump's collusion with Vladimir Putin in the lead up to the presidential election. So the feeling is if the FBI wasn't looking at NSA surveillance, they never would have discovered that Donald Trump was colluding with the Russians, which he was. Okay? Many things can be true. Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene can be right about Section 702, but for the wrong reasons. And yes, it was a warrantless search that discovered Carter Page, a Trump advisor in 2016, was talking to the Russians, and that triggered Crossfire Hurricane. And yes, maybe the FBI should have needed a warrant to look into Carter Page, but that doesn't discount the truth that Vladimir Putin was colluding with Donald Trump. I know, Russia. There are still Republicans and Democrats, or not really Democrats, faux liberals, who insist there was no Russia collusion. And they're trying to convince Americans to believe that the FBI's investigation into Trump and Russia colluding, all of that was based on zero evidence. Well, read the newspaper. Every day there's evidence that Trump and Putin and the Russians are colluding. And this is just from Friday. A federal appeals court upheld the conviction of Jesse Benton. Now, why this is just an example of, if you read the newspapers, every day you find more and more evidence of Russian collusion, of how the NRA was a Russian asset, served as a straw donor to Donald Trump. The biggest donor to Donald Trump was the National Rifle Association. They gave something like $30 million to Donald Trump in 2016, and they were going off and getting money from the NRA was getting money from the NRA. But this is who is Jesse Benton. On Friday, a federal appeals court upheld his conviction. He was found guilty of facilitating an illegal $25,000 donation to the Trump campaign from a Russian national named Roman Velaslenko. Okay? This is just something you pick up every day. I'm just another example. It is against the law to accept political donations from foreigners. It's also illegal to serve as a straw donor, to take money from a Russian national, launder it by depositing it in your own bank, and then cutting a check for the same amount to Donald Trump's campaign. This guy, Jesse Benton, had been indicted before. He was indicted for bribing an Iowa state senator back in 2011 to endorse Ron Paul in the Iowa caucuses. Remember Ron Paul? Dr. Ron Paul. He's Senator Rand Paul's father. Ron Paul was the congressman from Texas. His son, Rand Paul, is the senator from Kentucky. And Jesse Benton worked for both Ron Paul and Senator Rand Paul, and he got pardoned by Donald Trump as the former president was leaving office. Not over this. He got pardoned for the indictment. He was indicted for violating campaign finance law. I'm sorry, he was indicted for bribing a Iowa state senator in 2011 to endorse Ron Paul in the Iowa caucuses. And that indictment disappeared when Trump indicted him. But after the pardon, he was then indicted for violating campaign finance law. And he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. He gets released in June. I just mentioned this story as every day you can find proof of straw donors taking money from Vladimir Putin or the oligarchs and handing it over to Trump or a Republican, which explains, I'm going to get to the Ukraine supplemental in a second, okay? Louisiana legislators on Thursday moved out of committee a bill that repeals a Louisiana law that forces employers to provide child laborers time off for lunch. So right now in Louisiana, if you hire children, you got to give them time off for lunch. And Louisiana Republicans moved out of committee a bill that would repeal a law forcing employers to provide children who work for them time off for lunch. The bill was proposed by this Louisiana state representative, I'll call him. His name is Roger Wilder, a Republican, but of course, he owns several Smoothie King franchises throughout the South, in Louisiana and Mississippi. And Wilder, who's now a state legislator in Louisiana, said he didn't think it was fair that the children working at his Smoothie King franchise didn't have to be guaranteed a lunch break in Mississippi, but the kids working for his Smoothie King in Louisiana, they were able to force a lunch break on him, and he just didn't think that was fair. He said, quote, "I filed the bill because children want to work without having to take lunch breaks," unquote. He's doing it for the children because they want to work without taking a lunch break. For the children, not because he wanted to squeeze as much work out of them as he possibly could. He was doing it for them because children want to work. There are some bad people in this world. Bad, bad people. Louisiana's House Labor and Industrial Relations Committee approved the bill. It now goes before the entire State House for a vote. Now, think about this for a second. Is this legal? This guy, I don't know. This guy is, what's his name? Roger Wilder, okay? And he owns these Smoothie King franchises. He's the Smoothie King. And he is pissed off that the kids who work for him get a mandated lunch break in Louisiana, but the kids who work for him in Mississippi, he doesn't have to give them a lunch break. Is that legal? And can you get elected to a state house and then introduce legislation for your own financial benefit blatantly? Just allowing you to abuse the kids who work for you? I mean, you know, it's the age of Trump, so he didn't even try to hide the fact that I'm a state legislator, I own a chain of Smoothie Kings, and I'm sick of having to pay children for their lunch breaks. Is that legal to do that? But it does explain why Louisiana and Mississippi oppose abortion. Kids are a source of cheap labor. Arkansas, the odious Sarah Huckabee Sanders, she of the $19,000 lectern. She just spent $19,000 on a lectern, but there's no money for food stamps, but she buys a $19,000 lectern. She's bringing back child labor in Arkansas, and they're against abortion. They think children should be working, not going to school. They believe some kids are not destined to get an education. And if you look at Arkansas, they're not. They're not. Auto workers inside a Chattanooga, Tennessee Volkswagen plant voted to join the United Auto Workers. This is big. In an election run by the National Labor Relations Board, Joe Biden's National Labor Relations Board, Workers last week chose the UAW by a margin of 73%. It's a landslide. This despite Republican governors from 6 southern states, including Tennessee, urging workers not to join the UAW or any union, saying unions go against, quote, the values we hold dear. And what are those values that we hold dear? Starvation wages that make for a more compliant workforce, like, no lunch breaks. Now, this was the third attempt to unionize the factory in Tennessee. Twice before it failed, but it passed. And by law, Volkswagen must begin collective bargaining with the United Auto Workers. I seem to recall Volkswagen, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think they were disappointed that they voted against the union initially. I think Volkswagen expected, I think Volkswagen is still a German company, and in Germany, the reason their economy works so well is because 40% of any corporation, their board, 40% is the labor union. You have 40% of the board of directors of any German company have to represent the workers. And I think when Volkswagen first came to Chattanooga, they automatically assumed that the workers were going to join the union. I think, I'm going to have to look that up, but I don't know if Volkswagen is still a German company. But I do know there was a German company, a German automaker, I don't know, about 8 years ago, that was in a right-to-work state and automatically assumed that the workers would want to be part of a union. They couldn't believe that Americans had been brainwashed to literally vote against their own financial interests. Well, Joe Biden, who marched with the UAW last year, first president ever to march with strikers. He marched with the UAW last year when the UAW was striking the big 3 automakers in Detroit. Over the weekend, he congratulated both the UAW and the Chattanooga workers for their victory. He's out on the campaign trail, and Biden said, under his administration, unions have won big victories that have benefited workers in the auto industry, Hollywood actors and writers, I don't know about that, Teamsters, port workers, and healthcare workers. The Biden administration's Labor Department has intervened personally in several high-profile strikes, especially on behalf of auto and healthcare workers. Didn't do so well with the trains. That was a little disappointing. Shawn Fain, the head of the UAW, launched a drive throughout the South, bringing unions to auto factories and right-to-work states this year. Shawn Fain said now that they've unionized the workers in Tennessee, he's heading off to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where workers in a Mercedes factory will vote next month on whether they want to join the UAW. Maybe it was I think Mercedes is still a German company. It was one of the German companies that made billions working for Hitler, and they've whitewashed their past. But there was some German auto worker that couldn't believe they didn't want to. We had an author on the show 2 years ago about some of these German companies. Well, let me take a sip of water if it's okay with you. How are we doing on time? I'm almost done. I'm not doing a show tomorrow. So I just want to get all this stuff off my desk so it doesn't pile up. Okay? All right. Here we go. Up until Friday, Mike Gallagher was the Republican congressman representing Wisconsin's 8th congressional district. He'd been serving there since 2017. This is incredible. Gallagher is a Republican. He's an ex-Marine, probably still a Marine. You're always a Marine. He served in Iraq under General David Petraeus as an intelligence officer during the surge of 2007. He also graduated from Princeton and then went on to get a PhD from Georgetown. Here he is reading to Iraqi schoolchildren while serving during his second deployment back in 2008. Gallagher is a Republican. I'm going to assume there's very little he and I would ever agree on. But I do know he's someone I respect because I know he's serious about America. I also know he's smarter than I am. Again, I look at his voting record. I disagree with him on everything philosophically. But we do need Republicans like Mike Gallagher. Gallagher called it quits. And he did so suddenly, leaving Speaker Mike Johnson in the lurch with a one-vote majority. Mike Gallagher called it quits, and he timed his retirement so it would come after the deadline for a special election to be held for his seat. Under Wisconsin law, Mike Gallagher quit right after the deadline passed to hold an election to replace him, which means his seat remains empty for the rest of this Congress. Now, why would he do that? Why? There are good Republicans. There are good Republicans, and they are leaving. Why? Because of the death threats. Because of the death threats. It's been 6 months since the House held elections for Speaker. And you might remember before Mike Johnson was elected, there was a brutal dogfight between Majority Leader Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, who went to law school but failed the bar. Jim Jordan never passed the bar, even though he went to law school, and now he's chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. When it was Jordan's turn to run for Speaker, there was a 3-day weekend where House Republicans were lobbied by Jim Jordan, and the ones who were on the fence, we talked about this, you probably remember, the ones who signaled they weren't going to vote for Jim Jordan miraculously began receiving death threats at their homes. Their offices, their congressional offices, got barraged with texts, phone messages that threatened to kill them. Members of Congress, Republicans, said they had never experienced anything like this before. So when it came time to vote on whether Jim Jordan should be Speaker, the issue was the death threats. Members of Congress said, I cannot vote for Jim Jordan because of the death threats. We cannot reward this type of behavior. I did an entire show on this. And if you know anything about Jim Jordan, it shouldn't surprise you that his supporters were phoning in the death threats. Friday was Congressman Mike Gallagher's last day serving in the House. Here is what Mike Gallagher told reporters.
This is more just me wanting to prioritize being with my family and, I signed up for the death threats and the late night swatting, but they did not. And for a young family, I would say this job is really hard.
I signed up for the death threats and the late night swatting, but my children did not. So he quit. 2 deployments to Iraq. And the death threats here in America, serving his constituents, were too much for him. Since Donald Trump left office in 2020, the number of death threats against members of Congress and judges and prosecutors has more than doubled. People like Jim Jordan or Donald Trump never apologize. They say, I can't control my people. They have a mind of their own. This is Nazi shit. When election workers are frightened to show up to work, Donald Trump says he's going to have 100,000 monitors patrolling voting precincts on Election Day. This is what the Nazis do. This is what Vladimir Putin do. These are bad, bad people. And my father always used to say, the bad drives out the good. Representative Mike Gallagher is a good Republican. And what I don't understand is why they don't flip and become Democrats. I guess there are some issues that are a bridge too far. But the issue of our time, seems to me, is, at least for the next 6 months, is saving this democracy or republic or whatever you want to call it, this kleptocracy. Tom Cotton is the Republican senator from Arkansas who famously penned an article for the New York Times back in 2020 calling for Donald Trump to send the military into the streets to break up the Black Lives Matter protests. Now, that's just pure racism. Anybody who said Donald Trump needed to send the military into the streets to break up the Black Lives Matter protests is a Nazi racist. Same thing. As I've said repeatedly on this show, the Black Lives Matter protests were entirely and completely peaceful. Any and all violence during those protests came from the police or outside agitators. Every study says it only became violent when the police showed up. No police got shot by any members of the Black Lives Matter protest. I've been all over the studies. There's no analog, for example, to Kyle Rittenhouse, who was pampered by the police. But that doesn't stop Republicans from lying and saying the BLM protests were far worse than January 6th. They weren't. They were peaceful. They only got violent when the police showed up. Tom Cotton last week, Senator Tom Cotton of Arizona, horrible human being. Last week he said Americans need to take matters into their own hands, become vigilantes when you see pro-Palestinian protesters. He called the protesters criminals. Last week he said, quote, they had shut down a bridge. He said, quote, if something like this happened in Arkansas on a bridge there, let's just say I think there'd be a lot of very wet criminals that have been tossed overboard, not by law enforcement, but by the people whose road they're blocking. Oh, kind of like what you did on January 6th, right, Mr. Tough Guy? You stood up to the real criminals. He then encouraged Americans to take matters into their own hands. And he was called out on this, and he's doubled down. He said of the Palestinian protesters, quote, "If they glued their hands to a car or the pavement, well, it would be probably pretty painful to have their skin ripped off. But I think that's the way we handle things in Arkansas." What is this shit? That's the way we handle. Like, people say, where I come from, that's not the way they handle things. Like, we're supposed to, you're tough in Arkansas. That's how we handle things in Arkansas. Why don't you learn how to handle test scores in Arkansas? Instead of saying we handle things violently here in Arkansas, why don't you improve the test scores in your schools, the morbidity rates of pregnant mothers? Why don't you handle things in Arkansas so you're not at the bottom when it comes to poverty, education, leading in crime, lowest life bottom 10 in life expectancy. We handle things differently in Arkansas. Yeah, you sure do. You sure do. Well, Republicans love violence. That's what you give when you can't give people an education, when you can't give them good-paying jobs. Channel their rage and anger into scapegoating and violence, and that's what oldest trick in the book. And Republicans love violence. The problem is they take it out on each other, and they've erupted into a civil war over Mike Johnson's decision to defy the far-right pro-Putin wing of his party, and he pushed through a $61 billion foreign aid supplemental for Ukraine. It passed. It's going to get passed in the Senate. President Biden is going to sign it sometime this week. As you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene filed a motion for Johnson to vacate the chair 2 weeks ago as a warning shot of what would happen if he even thought about passing the Ukraine supplemental. Last week, Thomas Massie of Kentucky said he's co-sponsoring her motion for Mike Johnson to go. And then the two of them were joined by Arizona Republican Paul Gosar, whose own family has cut commercials urging his constituents to vote for anybody other than Paul Gosar because they say he's unhinged. Well, Donald Trump rules the Republican House of Representatives with an iron fist. He originally whipped votes for Kevin McCarthy back in January of 2023, and that got McCarthy elected Speaker. But then Trump demanded that Kevin McCarthy expunge Trump's two impeachments from the record books. And McCarthy explained, there are no record books. There's no procedure to expunge impeachments. You can't reverse an impeachment. And Trump said, you're disloyal. And Trump let Kevin McCarthy dangle slowly in the wind. And he was gone. Mike Johnson flew down to Mar-a-Lago a little more than a week ago so that he could be photographed with Donald Trump to send a signal to renegade members of the House, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, that if you go against me, you're also going against Donald Trump. But it now looks like Mike Johnson went against the president, or at least Donald Trump. He went against Donald Trump. Mike Johnson, after 6 months, it looks like he became his own man. He pushed through the Ukraine supplemental in direct defiance of Donald Trump and, of course, Vladimir Putin. So, I wasn't sure if I thought Mike Johnson might have been I thought he was being cagey, and I think he was hoping it would die in the Rules Committee, but apparently Mike Johnson had a change of heart. And it became very apparent on Friday that Johnson was going to force the Ukraine supplemental through the Rules Committee and get it to the floor for a vote on Saturday. So reporters caught up with Donald Trump on Friday during a break at his trial in the Manhattan courtroom. And here are reporters asking Donald Trump if he still supports Mike Johnson.
Do you still support Speaker Johnson? Do you still support Speaker Johnson?
Now, let me play that again. Do you still support Speaker Johnson? And it looks like Donald Trump couldn't hear the question. What do you think?
Do you still support Speaker Johnson? Do you still support Speaker Johnson?
I mean, it's echoing and reverberating off the walls. Apparently, Trump couldn't hear. He couldn't hear. Do you still support Speaker Johnson? But then, later in the day, Donald Trump was asked about this criminal trial. Do you plan to testify in this Manhattan criminal trial?
Yes.
Let's play that again. They asked, do you plan to testify?
Yes.
That he heard. That he answered. And isn't that great that he plans to testify? Maybe he will go to prison. That he answered. So, Mike Johnson seems to have incurred the wrath of Donald J. Trump. And it's going to be interesting to see if and how he survives a motion to vacate the chair. Heading into Saturday's big vote, Johnson had incurred the wrath of everybody. Everybody. He has been Speaker for 6 months, and some are even worried that it may be too late for Ukraine, that he took so long to get the supplemental passed that it took too long. Let's hope not. Here is Connecticut Democrat Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro. She's a miracle of democracy. She was testifying before the Rules Committee, she's a Democrat. She testified along with Republican Foreign Relations Chair Michael McCaul. And the two of them were urging the Rules Committee last week to release the Ukraine supplemental and get it to the floor for a vote on Saturday. Sitting on the Rules Committee is another Texas Republican. I think Michael McCaul is a Texan, but Chip Roy sits on the Rules Committee. And he said he would not allow the Ukraine supplemental to get out of committee unless the House voted on H.R. 2, which is the big Republican immigration bill that is racist, bigoted, and cruel. And if it passed in the House, which it wouldn't, it would certainly die in the Senate. There aren't 60 votes for H.R. 2. But the Republicans keep saying, no, we have to protect our own borders before we help Ukraine. Here's Congresswoman DeLauro telling Chip Roy and the Republicans that they are liars, that they They don't want to do border security. They don't want to do Ukraine. They don't want to do anything. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro.
Sentence about border security. I sat in the White House, not in a classified meeting, where Republican colleagues said that we won't have Ukraine without bipartisan border security. And then you know what? We accomplished bipartisan border security. It wasn't, and it was, oh, you can shake your head all you want, but Democrats and Republicans voted for border security. And you know what? It was Donald Trump who said, don't give Biden a win. You think about that. Put that aside. This moment is now. The United States Senate, you can have all the views you want about the United States Senate, but hold them for this debate. It is now. It is about the United States House of Representatives. We have the opportunity to do what we do here, and that is to govern. And what are we doing in governing? Is that to be a world leader. And for months and months, we have been diddling around where people are dying in Ukraine. Don't talk about what weapons we want to give them. We're not giving them what they need now, and it has been months in the coming. And we ought to today, immediately, we should have picked up that Senate bill, brought it to the floor, and voted on it immediately, and we would be out of here today in doing it. Let us not rewrite what is happening. The moment is ours. And if the House of Representatives abdicates its responsibility, yes, the history will write the story. And that it is on us. When we had that moment, we said no. I, for one, will not say no.
That is Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut. She's a Democrat, and she was testifying before the Rules Committee trying to get the Ukraine supplemental released and sent to the floor for a vote. Well, the next day, Chip Roy, Texan Republican, he didn't like being talked to that way, but he doesn't need an excuse to rant and rave. He's a rageaholic. Chip Roy is a rageaholic who doesn't want to govern. He just wants to scream and refuse to compromise. He took to the floor of the House, insisting that the bipartisan border bill that came out of the Senate was garbage, and that's why he's voting against the Ukraine supplemental. This is the same Chip Roy who famously screamed at the top of his lungs a few months ago that the Republican Party has accomplished nothing and we have zero to run on in November. Well, the reason you have zero to run on is because you refuse to work with the Democrats. You refuse to govern. You refuse to compromise. This is the same Chip Roy who has always been fine when the government is about to shut down. He always says, let it shut down. He has given interviews where he's pointed to the nation's capital, the dome, and he said he wished Washington, D.C. didn't exist. But to his credit, he was one of two members of the Freedom Caucus who voted to certify the election for Joe Biden after January 6th. But Chip Roy is a very angry guy. He's a rageaholic, and I relate to him. Like me, he cares more about being seen and heard than actually getting something done. He'd rather rail against the world than roll up his sleeves, maybe compromise a little. He is a rageaholic. I'm not. He is. He truly is the face and voice of the GOP. Just anger for the sake of anger, shouting to the heavens while getting nothing accomplished. Here he goes.
Despite the fact that the Speaker of the House repeatedly has said in January at the border, a trip I didn't take because I knew full well what would happen. It would be a show trip. And that's exactly the truth. If President Biden wants a supplemental spending bill focused on national security, it better begin with defending America's national security. We wanted to get the border closed and secured first. He said in a letter in December, supplemental Ukraine funding is dependent upon enactment of transformative change to our nation's border security laws. Well, here we are today with a sham vote. And let me be very clear. The people saying that we stopped H.R. 2 in the Rules Committee and didn't allow it to get connected to or get it to allow to be attached to the Ukraine bill, they are lying. That is not true. It was a separate rule, a separate vote designed as cover for Republicans to try to vote for a Ukraine funding bill without securing the border of the United States. And yes, I do agree with that point. That's the truth.
He also, before he became a congressman, his pedigree is he was Ted Cruz's chief of staff. So you know where he's coming from. He's a rageaholic, and sitting right behind him, it's interesting to see who sits behind a member of Congress when they're delivering a fiery speech to show support. Sitting behind Chip Roy are Pennsylvania Congressman Scott Perry and Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs. Now, they deny this. All three of them are members of the Freedom Caucus. Andy Biggs from Arizona and Scott Perry deny this, but we know it's true. After January 6, Congressman Scott Perry and Congressman Andy Biggs called Donald Trump asking for blanket pardons. The two of them were instrumental in the Stop the Steal movement leading up to January 6. In December of last year, a judge ordered Pennsylvania Congressman Scott Perry to turn over the contents of his phone. That phone had been seized earlier by special counsel Jack Smith's office, but it was locked. A judge said, no, you have to open it up and release the contents, because Scott Perry was in constant contact with Donald Trump. He was the one who found Clark, the low-level Justice Department attorney who Trump was planning to name acting attorney general. He was the one. Trump said to Scott Perry, I can't find anybody in the Justice Department willing to prosecute phony election fraud. And Perry said, oh, I know a guy in the Justice Department, this guy named Clark. And Trump called him in based on Scott Perry's recommendation and said, I'm going to make you acting attorney general. If you appoint Sidney Powell to be a special counsel who prosecutes imaginary voter fraud. And anyway, and then Andy Biggs has been asked to testify along with Paul Gosar before a grand jury in Arizona that's looking into the false elector scheme in Arizona. It's the Treason Party. Jeffrey Clark is his first name. Jeffrey Clark is the lawyer in the Justice Department. I've showed you the pictures of him in his underwear. Well, he answered the door in his underwear when the Justice Department came to seize his electronic equipment. One of the reasons the Republicans in the House are down to a one-vote majority is they threw out Republican George Santos. A special election was called to replace Santos, and it was won by Tom Suozzi, Suozzi's a Democrat. He held that seat before Santos, but Suozzi resigned so he could run for governor. Suozzi lost, and then when Santos was thrown out and they had a special election, Suozzi ran for it, and he won. Here is an adult. This is what an adult sounds like. Here is Tom Suozzi responding to Chip Roy's temper tantrum about the Ukraine supplemental and how you won't give us border security. Here is what an adult sounds like. Tom Suozzi, Democrat from New York's 3rd District.
Mr. Roy, the histrionics and the hyperbole are not working. You just said so yourself. It's not working. We're about to pass. It's not working. It's not working. The bottom line is...
The gentleman will suspend. House will be in order.
The bottom line is that we...
And Chip Roy just kept screaming at Tom Suozzi, and he's going, it's not working. It's not working. Finally, Suozzi was able to speak, and he addressed the bipartisan border deal that Senator James Lankford, a Republican, crafted. It was the most transformative border bill in decades. It died in the House because Trump said, no, that's my issue. We can't have anything on the border moving to Joe Biden's desk for him to sign. I can't allow Joe Biden to get any credit for fixing the border. Doesn't need to be fixed. That's a whole other issue. But here is a calm adult, Tom Suozzi, Democrat of New York, explaining why there isn't a border bill attached to the Ukraine supplemental.
We had a bipartisan solution by one of the most ethical, honest, hardworking, conservative Republicans in the United States Senate, James Lankford. And we didn't go forward with that bipartisan bill because President Trump and others said, we don't want to give Biden a victory. We want to campaign in the chaos.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman an additional minute.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. So they said, we don't want to go forward with that bill because we want to campaign on the chaos. We don't want to give a victory to the Democrats. It's not a victory for Biden or for the Democrats, for the United States of America. And for us to move forward as a country, we have got to work together. I see the people up here in the gallery today, people watch television, they read the newspaper, and they're sick of this. They don't want us fighting with each other. They don't want us with the histrionics and the hyperbole. They want us to sit down and negotiate a settlement.
Suozzi then reminded Republicans and me how Congress works, for better or worse, how it works. Bills become law. You have to compromise. You never get everything you want in life. So why would you expect to get everything you want from Congress? That's not selling out. It's working with what you got. Bernie Sanders wants Medicare for all, but he eventually compromises. He'll fight for socialized medicine, but then when he has to vote for Obamacare, he'll vote for it, and then he'll work the system and attach amendments to bills that surreptitiously create community health care centers that are transformative, that save lives. It's easy to be a wrecking ball who refuses to compromise. All you do is succeed in destroying things and lowering taxes for the richest 1%. It's easy to be a wrecking ball, to cut through all the BS. And what's the bottom line on this? Well, life is complex. There is no bottom line. George W. Bush didn't want to understand the complexities of the Middle East. He didn't know, and I'm not making this up, he didn't know that Iraq was made up of Shiites and Sunnis. He just wanted to destroy Baghdad. Donald Trump doesn't want to learn the complexities of democracy. He just wants to destroy it and become an authoritarian where you don't have to compromise. Democrats, or Bernie, who's not a Democrat, they have, some of them have a strong moral compass. The reason Joe Biden is succeeding, I mean, he got a $90 billion foreign aid package passed. I mean, this is another major victory, another major legislative victory for Joe Biden. He's a grinder. He wanted the foreign aid package passed in August, and he just kept playing a game, of inches and worked the system. You have to learn the game. And people like Chip Roy or Donald Trump, George W. Bush, Marjorie Taylor, they don't want to learn the game. They're ignorant. And if they do learn the game, they're too lazy to play it. They just want to rant and rave and call themselves principled conservatives. Here again is Tom Suozzi talking about H.R. 2, the Mike Johnson's racist, hateful migrant bill. And here he is telling Chip Roy and the Republicans what would happen if it passed, if you got your wish.
H.R. 2 was tried before. It didn't work. Let's say you get everything you want. Let's say Trump gets elected. Let's say that you win the House, you win the Senate. I don't want that to happen, obviously. But let's say you get everything you want. You won't get enough votes in the Senate. You'll still have to negotiate a bipartisan compromise. People have got to learn to get back to the basics of legislating and negotiating and working together to solve the problems that the people of America demand that we solve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Now, I didn't like Tom Suozzi when Bernie was running because he's one of those Democrats who says you're not going to be able to pass Medicare for all. And I go, well, F you and your Senate. There's a problem with adults in the room. I get that. But you can, if our side wants Medicare for all, we have to convince people. I don't think I do a good job convincing people why we need Medicare for all, calling them MAGA morons who have no right to have been born. If we really want to win politically, you got to convince. Anyway, you can learn how to legislate, or you can just support an authoritarian like Vladimir Putin, who warned that if America's Congress passes the Ukraine supplemental, America will pay a price. And this is his talking point, that this is Russian propaganda, and it comes directly from Vladimir Putin. This is what he said. Giving military aid to Ukraine hurts Ukraine. This is the official propaganda. By giving military aid to Ukraine, so says Putin, you are prolonging the war. Putin is saying, give peace a chance by letting Russia ethnically cleanse the Donbas region, kidnapping Ukrainian children, and then bringing them back to Russia. This is the argument. I watch Russian stooges, and they're saying, we want peace. We want peace. Give Ukraine, let the invading country win, because we want peace. Marjorie Taylor Greene, speaking of Russian stooges, is going to move sometime this week to get rid of Mike Johnson. But there is no question she has become the face of Russia. She is spouting Russian talking points word for word on the floor of the House. This is a compilation of Russian state media celebrating Marjorie Taylor Greene. It was put together by CNN. It's quite remarkable.
The issue is not with Johnson. Speaker Johnson is not the one who's running Congress. Marjorie Taylor Greene is running Congress. Everyone is afraid of her.
Выйти из Альянса призывает Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is proposing for the U.S. to withdraw from NATO. She believes that Americans should help Putin win.
She does. She has said that. She openly admits now that she wants Putin to win. She's on record saying Ukraine is run by Nazis who are persecuting Christians and that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine to save the Christians. This is what she said on Steve Bannon's radio show. Here is Ken Buck from Colorado. Now, up until a month ago, Ken Buck served in Congress. He's a Republican. He, along with Chip Roy, were the only two members of the Freedom Caucus to certify the election for Joe Biden. Ken Buck is a much more serious conservative than Chip Roy. He's not a rageaholic. And he walked away last month. He said, I'm done. I cannot work with Republicans anymore. He announced he was retiring 6 months ago. 6 months ago, he promised, I'm not going to vote for any speaker who is an election denier. So he wouldn't vote for Jim Jordan for speaker, and he wouldn't vote for Scalise, Steve Scalise, because they refused to say Joe Biden won fair and square. But then he ended up voting for the biggest election denier of them all, Mike Johnson, the man who slapped his name on that amicus brief for a lawsuit challenging the 2020 election. It eventually lost in the Supreme Court. But Johnson was the point man on that lawsuit. He got more than 100 members of Congress to sign his amicus brief. Mike Johnson is a world-class election denier, as much, if not more so, than Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise. But Ken Buck, this principled Republican, voted for Mike Johnson for speaker and then immediately said, I quit. And right before leaving Congress, he signed a discharge petition 2 weeks ago that would have forced a vote on the Ukraine supplemental. He wanted the Ukraine supplemental to pass. Here he is trashing Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Well, Moscow Marjorie has reached a new low. You know, during the Russian Revolution, Lenin talked about American journalists who were writing glowing reports about Russia at the time as useful idiots. And I don't even think that Marjorie reaches that level of being a useful idiot here. She is just mouthing the Russian propaganda and really hurting American foreign policy in the process. She's acting completely irresponsibly. And again, when history looks at this period of time, Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting for its freedom, and we should be with the freedom fighters in this war.
This is a woman, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a joke. But so was Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a joke. Hitler was a joke. Marjorie Taylor Greene this is her second term in office. She came to office quoting QAnon. There's video of her spouting QAnon theories. She's now graduated from QAnon to Putin, and she is repeating Russian propaganda word for word. She calls Ukraine a Nazi regime. She says Putin invaded Ukraine to denazify it. Here is Marjorie Taylor Greene last week during a House oversight hearing, getting her ass handed to her. And you go, how do these people live with themselves? Like, what? I'm going to show you an exchange here. Here is Marjorie Taylor Greene during a House oversight hearing talking about how she can't support Nazis. You know, Ukraine is run by Nazis, and as an American, I cannot stand by and allow us to support the Nazis in Ukraine. Here she is.
This is an extremely concerning situation. I don't think anyone in the United States government, Americans, do not support actual Nazis or white supremacists. I know I certainly do not.
She said, I certainly do not support Nazis or white supremacists. Maxwell Frost represents Florida's 10th congressional district. He's a Democrat, born in 1997. He's 27, just elected to Congress back in 2022. Now, here he is challenging Marjorie Taylor Greene's contention that she doesn't support Nazis.
Interesting to hear my colleague just now talk about disavowing white supremacists when in 2022 she spoke at an event led by white supremacist and white nationalist Nick Fuentes, and when asked about it, doubled down on it and said, we're going to focus on people, not labels. So get out of here with that damn hypocrisy.
Yeah. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is less than 2 years ago, speaking at an event sponsored by Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is a Nazi. He's a racist. He denies the Holocaust ever happened, but he says it was a good idea. This is a selfie, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's with conservative activist Michelle Malkin, who has spoken at several events sponsored by Nazis and KKK members. Again, Nick Fuentes hosts an internet program where he openly calls for the extermination of the Jews, which is why Kanye became a good friend of Nick Fuentes. You might remember that Kanye brought Nick Fuentes down to Mar-a-Lago to have dinner with Donald Trump in November of 2022, not even 2 years ago. And then Donald Trump claims, well, I didn't know he was a Nazi. Well, you knew Kanye was spouting anti-Semitism. You didn't know Nick Fuentes was a Nazi, the same way Donald Trump said he had no idea who David Duke was in 2016, the KKK leader. He said, I don't know who David Duke is, when David Duke endorsed him. But nothing is going to stop Moscow Marjorie Taylor Greene. These people have no shame, no moral compass. I don't know why she's spouting propaganda. Putin either has compromat on her, or she's taking money from Putin, or she genuinely believes that Vladimir Putin is the great white Christian hope for Asia. Now, earlier I told you word for word Vladimir Putin's talking point about why America should not give funding to Ukraine. Vladimir Putin said, by America giving money to Ukraine, giving arms, we are prolonging the war. And this will result in more Ukrainians dying. The Russian propaganda, the official party line, the talking point for Russian stooges is, if you're for peace, then you will let Ukraine lose. That giving weapons to Ukraine is going to kill Ukrainians. That is the official party line from Vladimir Putin. Here is Marjorie Taylor Greene repeating Vladimir Putin's talking points word for word before the vote on the Ukraine supplemental. Before the Ukraine supplemental, she attached an amendment, and this is what they're debating. She attached an amendment that would zero out all spending for Ukraine. Zero aid. She wants to give zero aid to Ukraine. Not just no military aid, no humanitarian aid to Ukraine. This is an amendment she attached, and they're debating her amendment. Here she's telling us why America should zero out all spending for Ukraine.
For nothing. Ukraine is not even a member of NATO. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but the most important thing you hear in Washington, D.C. is, oh, we have to spend Americans' hard-earned tax dollars over to Ukraine and keep the money going to continue to murder Ukrainians, wipe out an entire generation of Ukrainian men so that there are widows, there are fatherless orphans, there are not enough men to work in their industries. Oh, but you really support Ukraine. Wow, what kind of support is that? It's repulsive. You know, shame on the American government.
Unbelievable. Putin invades Ukraine, and by our giving weapons for Ukraine to defend itself, we're killing Ukrainians. Well, Democrat Adam Smith, who also wrote Wealth of Nations, represents Washington's 9th congressional district. Maybe it's a different Adam Smith. I think it might be. But here he is debating Marjorie Taylor Greene, responding to Moscow Marjorie by calling her amendment to zero out all spending for Ukraine. He calls it, Adam Smith calls her idea demented. I would have called her demented. That's why I'm not a United States congressman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to focus on one argument of the sponsor of this amendment, who's basically saying that if we pass this bill, we are advocating the killing of Ukrainians. That is a uniquely demented way of looking at this war.
Yeah. Then he explained why it's demented.
Putin invades. Putin, as we speak, is bombing and killing Ukrainian civilians. And the only thing that is reducing the number that he can kill is the Ukrainians' ability to fight back. So to look at this from a pure Russian propaganda standpoint, they invade, they bomb, they kill, and it's our fault for helping the Ukrainians defend themselves. That is the argument here against supporting Ukraine, and it literally makes no sense. If you want peace, give the Ukrainians the strength to stop Putin. He is the one that will not come to the bargaining table right now because he thinks he's winning. He thinks he can go all the way to Kyiv. He thinks he can take the whole country. If we give the Ukrainians the ability to stop him, that forces him to the table. It makes no sense to say that giving the Ukrainians the ability to defend themselves is what's killing them, when it is very clearly the Russians that are killing them. And I would also note that no president has added more to the deficit in one 4-year in one 4-year term than President Trump. And I didn't hear a single Republican complaining about the debt or the deficit during that period of time. The Ukrainians need our help to bring peace, to stop Putin, to stop what he is trying to do. Also, to Ms. McCollum's point, this also helps our industrial base. We face a dangerous world between Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, all of whom are working together, by the way. If we don't help Ukraine stop Russia, that helps Iran, that helps China, that helps North Korea. This is about our national security, which I am quite confident that whether asleep or awake, the American people also care dearly about. Please defeat this amendment and support Ukraine and support United States national security interests. Thank you. I yield back.
Adam Smith is very smart. Did you see the way he just snuck in? This also helps our industrial base, and then he just plowed right through it. Why did he say it also helps our industrial base? Because he represents Washington State, where Boeing is either headquartered or used to be headquartered. Any Democrat who comes from Washington State is taking a lot of money from Boeing, and Boeing benefits from war. That being said, it was a pretty smart retort to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Of course, her amendment to zero out all spending on Ukraine died, and Saturday was the vote. Would the $61 billion supplemental for Ukraine pass in the House? We were always told for 6 months, if Mike Johnson would just bring it to the floor for a vote, it would pass.
On this vote, the yeas are 311 and the nays are 112. The bill is passed. One voting present. I missed it, but thank you. Okay. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. The chair would remind my colleagues to observe proper decorum. Flag waving on the floor is not appropriate. The House will be in order.
Well, that was the scandal, the flag waving. That was scandalous. Well, the Ukraine supplemental passed. 210 Democrats voted for it. Only 101 Republicans voted for it. Once again, Mike Johnson, all his spending bills have been passed with more Democrats voting for them instead of Republicans. But there was Ukraine flag waving. People were waving the Ukrainian flag in the House of Representatives, and Marjorie Taylor Greene was incensed. Here she is calling the Democrats unpatriotic Americans for waving the Ukrainian flag after the vote passed.
But this is the sellout of America today. When we had members of Congress in there waving the Ukrainian flag on the United States House of Representatives floor, while we're doing nothing to secure our border, I think every American in this country should be furious. Who's going to vote for these people? How can you vote for these people? They don't serve our country.
They don't serve our country. They don't parrot Putin's talking points word for word. They waved Ukrainian flags, and that, she says, violates official decorum in the House of Representatives. Apparently, there are rules when it comes to the House of Representatives, and you're not allowed to wave flags, little mini flags. And, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene, as we know, is a stickler for congressional rules. Here she is heckling Joe Biden at his very first State of the Union. She's tag teaming with her then friend Lauren Boebert, who Marjorie turned on last year by walking up to Lauren Boebert and calling her a little bitch because Lauren wouldn't co-sponsor Marjorie's articles of impeachment for Joe Biden. Instead, Lauren introduced her own and said, "You're a little bitch." And she violated decorum on the House floor. You're not allowed to do that. And she was eventually thrown out of the Freedom Caucus because of that. And she refused to stop calling Lauren Boebert a whore because Marjorie Taylor Greene is all about decorum. She's a stickler. Here she is at Joe Biden's second State of the Union, where she decided to heckle the president while dressed as Cruella de Vil's sister. And here is Marjorie Taylor Greene heckling Joe Biden at last month's State of the Union, where Margie violated official dress code, which forbids members of Congress from wearing any political buttons or clothing during a State of the Union address. And she said, screw that. Here she is dressed to the nines, full MAGA, MAGA hat, MAGA jacket, MAGA buttons, in direct violation of congressional rules because she's a stickler for the rules. Waving Ukrainian flags, unacceptable to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Here is Carrie Lake spewing the, "I can't believe Democrats waved Ukrainian flags." Here she is spewing this talking point.
And today, what they did when they voted to further fund Ukraine, and they were waving Ukrainian flags around and chanting Ukraine, I don't know what country I'm in anymore. And I think the American people are absolutely shocked and floored by what we witnessed in the House of Representatives today.
If you don't know what country you're in, it's probably because you're reading Vladimir Putin's talking points word for word. Well, after passing the Ukraine supplemental, Speaker Mike Johnson was asked, what took you so long? Why did it take you 6 months to allow the Ukraine supplemental to find its way to the floor for a vote.
Listen, the House had a lot of important work to do here. We had to get the government funded in our appropriations process. We had to reauthorize the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. We had a lot of important measures that had to be done, and we got to this as quickly as we could. This is an important matter. I think it's timely. I think you've heard from leaders around the world, including in Ukraine, that this is being done on a timely basis, and the House had to have the time to deliberate and do this in the right manner. I think we did our work here, and I think history will judge it well.
There does seem to be momentum building within the far-right recesses of the Republican caucus to get rid of Mike Johnson specifically because of this Ukraine supplemental. Here he is being asked, after it passed, if he fears that he's about to get canned.
No, listen, as I've said many times, I don't walk around this building being worried about a motion to vacate. I have to do my job. We did. I've done here what I believe to be the right thing, and that is to allow the House to work its will. And as I've said, you do the right thing and you let the chips fall where they may.
Eric Burleson is a Republican member of Congress. He's from Missouri, who now says Mike Johnson used to be my friend. He became Speaker. I no longer recognize the man.
Johnson has become his reputation, his history, his legacy will be the speaker who got things done with Democrats. And unfortunately, that's a fact. I don't even recognize I don't even recognize the person that I once called a friend.
His crime? Working with Democrats. Well, Florida Republican Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, sometimes she's Jewish, sometimes we find out her grandfather fought on the side of the Nazis, sometimes she's Hispanic, sometimes she's an Arab, sometimes she's white. She claims many identities. Here she is on Matt Gaetz's talk show, explaining why there might be some resistance among Republicans to voting for Mike Johnson to vacate the chair. Because what happens is you vote for him to vacate the chair, he gives it up, and now you have new elections for Speaker, and here's what she's concerned about.
So I heard that if and when the motion to vacate is introduced, that there will be immediate resignations of a couple of more moderate members of Congress. And in the event that happens, that ultimately means it does go to a Democrat speaker. And so we're in a predicament.
So there are some people who are trying to convince Marjorie Taylor Greene not to introduce the motion, but she's got Thomas Massie of Kentucky and the unhinged Paul Gosar of Arizona who are pushing for it. And after the Ukraine supplemental was passed, she's a rageaholic. Here she is.
This is the third betrayal by Mike Johnson. He delivered a two-part omnibus, funded the Department of Justice, 91 federal indictments against President Trump, funded the FBI that raided Mar-a-Lago, gave him a brand new FBI building, funded Joe Biden's open border policies that are killing Americans every single day. Then he reauthorized FISA that spied on American citizens, spied on President Trump's campaign, and he voted against the warrant requirement, the same warrant requirement that he was for 6 months ago. And then he did this bullshit in here on the House floor, foreign war package that does nothing for America.
Keeping it classy, saying BS on, that's why I don't curse. There's a certain type of mind that resorts to vulgarity. She does it. Trump does it. Low class. Here's Thomas Massie, and then we'll wrap it up, who is co-sponsoring the motion to vacate, and after the vote, after the Ukraine supplemental passed, Massey said Johnson's going to resign. And early this morning, I'm hearing that that's what Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying, that we don't think Johnson, we think he's just going to leave. And here's Thomas Massey from Kentucky telling us why he thinks Mike Johnson is just going to quit.
We want him to resign and to announce his resignation so that we don't go speakerless for a period of time. The honorable way for him to leave right now is to announce his resignation ahead of time and give us time to replace him. We prefer not to go into that loop like we had last fall.
But he's not going to resign. So then what are you going to do?
Right. So he will say what John Boehner said until the very day he said, I resign. He will say, I'm staying here and there's nothing you can do. And John Boehner said that the day before when he had the Pope speak on the floor. And then he came to HC5 the next day and said, I resign.
Well, what do I think is going to happen? I'll tell you in a second. There have been reports that House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has signaled to Mike Johnson that if you bring the Ukraine supplemental to the floor and they exact a price and file a motion to vacate the chair, the Democrats will reward your heroics by voting for you to be speaker, which, like, who would want to be speaker of that house with those Republicans? Here is Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries being asked before the vote what it would take for him to protect Mike Johnson's job. And he mentions Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, and Paul Gosar, the three Republicans who have co-sponsored the motion to vacate the chair. And, well, listen.
Moscow, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Massey, and Gosar are quite a group. And I'm sure that will play some role in our conversation. But central to the conversation, the prerequisite to the conversation, is to make sure that the national security legislation in totality is passed by the House of Representatives.
So I don't know how this plays out. I like to make predictions. I have no idea. You've got Donald Trump sitting in a courtroom. He was a surrogate speaker in many ways. I don't think he has the influence that he had. The fact that the Ukraine supplemental got passed, that Mike Johnson defied him, they are the chaos party. They bring chaos. He brings chaos. Republicans bring chaos, chaos to themselves and to this country. I don't know if Mike Johnson stays. But I do think, as bad as he is, he's proven himself trustworthy to the Democrats and to certain people, some Republicans in the House. I don't know. That's the show. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. I'm not doing a show tomorrow. I'm going to do a show on Tuesday. Sorry I went so long, but this stuff builds up, and if I don't let it out, I can't do Tuesday's show. So thank you. If you stuck with me, thank you. Thank you to Bob in the chat room. And if you enjoyed any of this, please like this. That's the best way for me to remain in your feed. Of course, subscribe to my channel and my newsletter. And if you want to thank me, the best way is to copy and paste the link to this episode and put it in an email, a text, or social media and share it with your friends. leave a comment. Once again, thank you for listening to me and letting me get this out of my system so I don't explode. Thank you.